So let's discuss explicit and implicit grids in more detail. So here we are in our 02 folder, and here we have 12 items now in container, and this container has this grid. So if we go in our inspect element layout, here we can see we have grid overlay, and if we check this and change the color to something like green, here we are seeing the number of rows with 1+, and here we are seeing the number of columns with 1+. This is basically tracking, you can say that. So now here I'm gonna do, let's define our column, that is grid template columns, and I would say 100 px and 100 px. With that, I will add a gap of 10 pixel. So how we will differentiate between the explicit ones and implicit ones? Explicit grid is mainly about what we defined here. We defined our 2 columns of 100 pixels, that is explicit. These 2 columns are the explicit ones. However, these rows that we are getting here are the implicit ones, as we haven't defined it here. So that's the main difference between these two. Now if we add it here, grid template row, and we say that 200 pixel and 200 pixel. So here we are defining our first 2 rows and first 2 columns. This grid that we are having here is the explicit one, and the other elements and the other items that we are having it here are the implicit ones. So the question is how we can work with implicit grid, and the answer is we can use grid auto rows, and we can say here is 100 pixels. What this 100 pixels does is it will add in each of the implicit grid item. As you can see here, first 2 rows is of 200 pixels, and then we have the implicit grid, and that is covering 100 pixels each. If you can see the size here, you can see that 200 pixels, and then we have this 100 pixel each. So here you can see that. So here we want is in our implicit grid, first row is of 100 pixel and the second row is of, you can say, 250 pixels. What this will does is, now we have this explicit grid of 2 rows of 200 pixel, then we are starting our implicit grid here of 100 pixel, and now we will have the second row of implicit grid is of 250 pixel. After that we will have 100 pixels again, here you can see that, and we have 250 pixels again. So here is the basics of implicit and explicit one. Now here is another question. If we define here, let's say we define here our columns, this will add nothing here because our explicit grid is ending up at 2 columns, so we are getting our next item by default in the next row. Let's see how we can change this layout from rows to columns in our next video.